Hi, today we are going to talk about assemblies and how to optimize compile times. So the problem we are trying to solve is that in Unity, all the files are compiled into a single DLL, and every time one of those files changes, the entire DLL is rebuilt because there's only one. So if you have 1,000 files, 1,000 scripts in your project, and you modify one, all 1,000 gets recompiled and linked because they are all part of the same library. And this is not very convenient because when a project is large, typically we make relatively small changes compared to all the overall files. And so we would like to rather, recompile only as much as possible just the files we change or close to it, right? So one big way to save in compilation times is to separate the project, in a sense partition it in different sections depending on whether we expect the files in each section to change often or not. So for instance, all the files in our project will be in here, right? And in particular the scripts, right? So far we have only one, the main architecture for the Bootstrap we saw before. But later there will be many files here. Okay, so what we want is that, okay, every time you modify one of these, it's fair that they all get recompiled, but we would like that they get recompiled in a dedicated library. So for this reason, in project, we created this runtime assembly definition. How do we create it? Well, you create a folder, you move only the files or folders that contain files that you want to be recompiled as a single library. You right-click, you say create assembly definition, right? And as you can see, I already have one called runtime, so I don't need this one. And if I click on it, in the inspector, what do I see? Well, starting from the bottom, there is this selection of which platform is this library for. Well, in my case, I assume it's all of them, right? So if I compile for PC, Macs, Linux, or iOS, Android, you name it, PlayStation, they should all, this library, that is the one that contains the binary of all the files I personally write, should be in there. Fair enough, right? So then there is another section above that says, oh, by the way, this particular library uses, the code in it uses calls to functions that are in other libraries. For instance, the Cinemachine is a package that is made by Unity and controls cameras. And we use it a lot because we have so many cameras and around the character, and so we manipulate them with Cinemachine. So we had to add it as a dependency because basically the library that contains Cinemachine code has to be compiled in order for this code at the end of the day to run because it depends on it. And same for the input system, we use the new input system, we don't use the old one, so again we need that. And then of course we need the framework to build third-person character controllers, kinematic character controllers called Scivolo. We build on top of that, right? We use the bare functionalities to build our own character controller. So if we just write the code that depends on Scivolo, but we don't tell the library that the library, our library, that contains our code, depends on the other library that contains Scivolo code, then it won't work. It maybe compiles, it makes calls, but then at runtime it fails, right? And scriptable object architecture is another package that essentially allows us to work with scriptable objects. So basically these are assembly definition references, basically references to other assembly definitions, to other files like this, to other folders that contain files with one assembly definition themselves. Now notice that all of these packages, we don't write this code, right? They are all installed using essentially the Windows package manager, right? And we search for each one and we install it. And where do we put them? Well, we put them here, right? So when we install them, they all end up under assets, but then we drag and drop each of those folders, like 3D, game kit character, and effects, and mente baccata, that is the one that contains the Scivolo character controller, this scriptable object architecture. We all drag and drop them inside this folder that we made called extern. And then, again, we right-click, create assembly definition, and we name it external. And again, is for any platform, because basically these libraries that we need them whether we run it on a Nintendo Switch or on a PlayStation or an Xbox or a PC or a Mac. Now we need it because we need cameras, we need inputs, we need the infrastructure for the character controller, you name it. So all part. And then there is this. This may seem peculiar that the library that is made of the code among them, the one that contains the character controller itself, the infrastructure for the character controller, depends on it. And the reason is that if you go into mente baccata Scivolo character controller, you see that there are two folders, right? The demo and the actual technology that implements it. The technology is split into scripts that are more high level in here, and then the ones that are more low level, like the ones that do all the math calculations and stuff. But fundamentally, these are the kernel, like the core. And the demo uses it, right? The demo is a completely separate namespace. Let me show you. See, the demo is in a namespace called mente baccata Scivolo character controller demo. So all of these classes that are in this namespace, notice what they use. They use the Scivolo character controller without demo, right? See? So that means that the demo obviously depends on the character controller technology. So it is like there are two things in this package. There is the actual technology and the demo that uses that shows how the technology is supposed to be used. Now the files of the technology of the demo depends on the files that contain the technology. Hence, you had to add it here. Now, if you still have a doubt that this is, mumbo jumbo, look at the forums. The author of the Scivolo character controller says this. There are no particular restrictions to the use of the asset. However, I suggest modify only the scripts in the demo folder, which I actually don't consider part of the asset itself, but just an example to show the asset functionality. Hence, this example needs to depend on the tech of the Scivolo character controller, and that's why it needs to be added. If you remove it, it doesn't compile. All right? So, it seems strange, but that's because, again, there are two parts to it. All right, and then there is the editor folder that contains the editor. So normally as soon as you create an assembly definition, it looks like this, right? It has all the checkboxes because it assumes you are gonna use it for everything. But actually, because this is a particular folder with the editor scripts, that is a special folder where you use scripts that don't run when you press play, or maybe you build a binary, right, and you build a binary for some platform, right, is actually something that runs when you are not playing. This is code that runs inside the editor. So for instance, all these plugins that allow you to do special things inside the editor, to build a dialogue system or an inventory system, they are all a mix of actual code that runs at runtime and code that runs at script time. So what do? Well, we say the select all, then we look with the target platform, we only care about the editor, and we say basically these scripts, modify them only when we compile scripts targeted to the editor. Right, and they don't depend on anything because right now, we are not using anything. But in general, they tend to be pretty self-contained. So usually there are no many references at all. Even though there may be libraries made to facilitate writing editor scripts, in which case, if you use them, we would add them here, right? So for now, we don't have any projects. So far, we only have the main architecture, of course, recompile. This is something I want to show you now because I forgot. So let's say you go to, I don't know, project, runtime, you make a change somewhere. You have to go down, bottom right, and say apply, okay? If you don't do it, as you have seen, he opens a window and says, do you want to apply those changes? And of course, you, like me, if you forget, you say yes, and now you catch up. So this is great because you see these scripts, the 3D game kit, the effects, the character control architecture, the scriptable objects, or the input system or the stream machine framework. We don't really modify those files, right? Even if exceptionally we need to put our hands into it and maybe make a small change, it is really the exception of the rule. So it doesn't happen very often that we need to recompile those files, usually not at all. And because a typical Unity project may contain even dozens of plugins because they're useful, they save time. Now the fact that if we modify one of our files, also all the plugins, dozens of plugins, and some of them are really big, get recompiled, it really burns a lot of time. So by having place them under external, all the plugins that we installed through the package manager, and having their own the assembly definition, because they never change, they never gets recompiled. And so we are saving a ton because our code, compared to all the ones in the plugins, probably is less. So now we are going to, when we touch our own files, we are going to recompile only our own files. And that's a big saving. So when you see it recompiles, it takes much less. If you have used plugins before in the past with Unity, because they are very useful and they do save time, you have noticed probably that there is this drawback. The more you add, the slower it takes for Unity to recompile. Oh, I changed only one line. Why yesterday it was taking only like 5 seconds and now it takes 2 minutes? Well, because since yesterday you have installed many plugins. But there is no reason why it should take more than the 5 seconds it was taking before, because our code more or less is still the same. So separate the code into partition the code into separate folders, like my own project files, the external ones, and maybe one for the editor scripts, and create an assembly for each one. Okay, specify the assembly references that they need, and that's it. You are done. Okay, thank you.